The bees are dying, and when they go, they'll take the rest of us with them, right? Well, maybe that's true, but the answer isn't that simple. There are so many misunderstandings and misconceptions about bees today that it is frustrating for beekeepers like me to interact with the general public sometimes. And who am I? My name is Erin Fisher, and I'm a certified North Carolina beekeeper and naturalist. My interest in bees began at a very young age. As a child, I spent many happy hours watching an observation beehive at a nature center close to my home, which is much like the one that I helped take care of at my place of employment, Discovery Place Nature. Along with several other naturalists and certified beekeepers, and under the guidance of a master beekeeper, we maintain several hives for teaching and honey production. So many people think that honey is the main reason to be a beekeeper. In fact, it might be the most annoying question we get asked as beekeepers. I spoke to several beekeepers in the course of this project, and the feeling was pretty universal.
What do you do with the honey? That's the biggest one I get all the time because everyone wants free honey.
Honey?
Can I have some honey?
Beekeeping is an ancient hobby. The Egyptians and the Greeks, along with the Chinese, all around the world, kept bees. There are species of bees which produce honey which can be consumed by humans all around the world, and most of them have been captured and kept in one way or another by man. Yeah, just like a dog or a cat. Most people assume that honeybees are wild animals that are native to the United States, but they're not. They are farm animals like a pig or a cow. We have hundreds of species of native pollinators that are important to our crops and food production that don't get quite the same attention as the cute little honeybee. The earliest beekeepers noticed that bees naturally make colonies in dead trees or other hollow areas, so they took advantage of the colonies they noticed and robbed them of their honey. In Europe, some people will try to care for the bees by drilling holes in the tree to give them more ventilation, or add steps up to the tree cavity to make it easier to take their honeycomb, but they were not managing the hive in any meaningful way. Eventually, people figured out that if they scooped out many bees at once along with a lot of the honeycomb, they could place them in a straw or wicker basket called a skep, and maintain the bees in one place where it was easy to harvest their honey. Honeybees have three main players in their colony. There is typically one large, mature queen bee, thousands of her daughters who are workers, and a few dozen of her sons called drones. The queen bee controls the hive through the production of pheromones which circulate around the hive. While she is the one in charge, she is also dependent on her workers to feed her, clean up after her, and build the colony itself. Bees create wax from their body in the form of small flakes, which they then chew and mold into the hexagonal shape of honeycomb. These cells are the building blocks of the hive. In the cells, the queen then lays eggs which are raised through the life cycle of egg, larva, pupa, and finally adult by the workers. The workers serve many roles during their short lives. A typical worker bee only lives between 6 weeks in the summer and 6 months in the winter. They care for the queen and the baby bees, build up the comb, create honey in their bodies, collect tree sap to turn into propolis, which is an all-purpose sealant used to make sure there are no gaps or drafts in the colony, forage and store pollen from flowers, and defend the hive itself from anything which might threaten it. While in a healthy colony, the queen is the only one able to lay eggs, the workers are the true main powerhouse, keeping the society functioning. The male bees, or drones, don't do much when compared with their sisters. They hang around the hive eating honey and pollen, leaving each warm day in the spring, summer, and early fall to fly up and congregate in one area a few miles from the hive. The drones are like bachelors at a bar waiting for a young queen from the neighboring hive to fly by. If a queen does arrive, the drones quickly mate with her and then die immediately afterwards. If they never meet a queen, their lives are essentially wasted. If they're still in the colony when cold weather hits, their worker sisters will drag them out and throw them mercilessly out to die in the cold. The queen only goes out once or twice for her bridal flight, and when she does this, she collects all of the sperm she will need to fertilize the thousands of eggs she will lay over the 1 to 2 year lifetime. Once humans had made enough observations about bees to understand their life cycle, it became a lot easier to keep them in colonies. They learned that they could create new colonies by removing a queen bee and half of her workers to a new skep. The remaining bees would raise a new queen in the colony left behind and quickly build their population back up. The main problem with this type of beekeeping was that it meant to collect the honey, the bees would typically be killed with smoke by burning the skep. In the 1700s, a man named Langstroth decided to change all that by experimenting with a beehive made of a wooden box with wooden frames, which could be lifted out of the hive. This meant that the hive could be inspected much more easily, split into new hives with ease, and that honey could be removed from the frames by opening the wax cappings, rather than burning the whole thing and starting over every year. Making wax takes a lot of energy for the bees, and if they don't have to create fresh wax every year, they can dedicate that energy to making honey, so the birth of modern beekeeping made honey much easier to access. Bees drink nectar and eat pollen, but when these resources grow thin, the bees turn to their pantry of stored food and the beehive's honeycomb to stay alive. Luckily enough for humans, bees are kind of like doomsday preppers. They put away much more food than they will ever need, which means if they're properly managed, we can safely remove the honey without really having much of an impact on their long-term health. As many novice beekeepers can attest, if you remove too much of their honey, the bees will die over the winter, so it's a delicate balance. Many people seem to believe that honeybees are aggressive creatures, when in fact they are defensive, and only when they have something to defend, like a hive. That's in contrast to their other Hymenoptera cousins, such as wasps and yellow jackets.
I've gotten stung by bees so many times, and they are really not painful, but wasps, they hurt. I have traumatizing memories. Stung in the face. Okay. Stinging. That's all they care about, stinging.
Yeah.
Like, there's so much more to them than just, like, their little protection.
There's a lot of unnecessary fear around beekeeping as well. One of the best to protect bees is be receptive to your neighbors acquiring beehives or getting some of your own. Beekeeping is a surprisingly engrossing hobby and also a lot of fun for many people.
Again, it all goes back to that little stinger. And I think that's the biggest thing people have to get past. I think people are interested in bees, I think they love bees, but I don't think everybody wants to be a beekeeper because, one, they're scared of them, you know. They won't go and stand right next to a hive like a beekeeper will. If you show a beekeeper a hive, a beekeeper will walk right up to the hive and just stand there and look at it. If you show it to people, they'll stand back and go, that's good, I can see it from here. So I think overcoming the behavioral misconceptions of bees to understand that bees can actually be manipulated and handled and worked with. I don't think people, when they see a beehive and they see a hive that has 60,000 stinging insects in it, they don't see that as calming, they don't see that as something fun to do. When people ask me why do I do it, I tell them the same thing. To me, I lose myself in the beehive. I mean, I go in there and I manipulate the frames slowly. It's really cool to have them crawl over you, not sting you. You just kind of, you're almost kind of a part of their hive at that point. They just trust you and they just go about and do what they normally do. So it's that trust and almost kind of like a bond that you have with the bees that allows you to be able to manipulate them. And I think as beekeepers, we all want to share that with people. We want people to share that because we feel like if they share that and they understand what we're talking about, then I think we feel like they will love bees as much as we do. And I think that's probably the biggest desire. I don't know if necessarily everyone will be able to become a beekeeper, but just to try to find a way to foster people's appreciation of bees as much as beekeepers have them, then we wouldn't be in the situations that we're in.
One of the easiest things you can do as a local citizen is to buy honey from a local beekeeper, protect swarms when you see them from other people who might try to harm them until a beekeeper can arrive to safely remove them, put them in a hive. You can also make sure that people are aware of bees, their role in their environment, what they do for us, and also how to protect native pollinators, because native pollinators and honeybees should go hand in hand. We should not prioritize the safety and survival of one over the other. They both have a role to play in our ecosystem.
We need to start utilizing our native pollinators and providing habitat and pollination and forage for our native bees and utilizing the natural process and re-envisioning the way that we think about farming and agriculture. Just like humans need a diversity of food in their diet, so do bees. It's not healthy for them to just have pollen and nectar from almonds or just from apples or cherries. They need more than one food source as well. Prior to the arrival of the European honeybee, we had all sorts of native bees, carpenter bees, mining bees, mason bees, leafcutter bees, bumblebees. Thousands of native bees that are oftentimes more effective at pollinating the plants and the crops that are grown in these areas because they've evolved and adapted with the climate. And a lot of them are more effective. And even some studies show, mason bees are more effective pollinators of apples than bumblebees. There's a southeastern blueberry bee, which is really good at pollinating the blueberries. So honeybees are awesome. But there's also other native bees. All I can say is, the more forage, native wildflowers and plants that we can put out there, the better to recruit our native pollinators.
Native pollinators and honeybees should be managed hand in hand and respected equally. While it might be important for our way of life to maintain honeybee colonies, that should not come at the sacrifice of native pollinators. At the end of the day, it is tempting to just tell people to only do certain things, only buy certain products, or live their lives a certain way. But unless people genuinely care about the nature that is all around them, preaching is useless. Don't go out of your way to hurt a bee when you see it. In fact, don't go out of your way to hurt anything when you see it. Just try to live in harmony with the nature around you. Maybe that's the most important message of all.